On the 21st of April 1949, a 31-year-old woman was led out of her prison cell inside of the French town of Angers, and she was led into the execution chamber. Her executioner was waiting for her, and Germaine Leloy-Godefroy looked pale, and she was anxious as she approached the device of death, the guillotine. Her execution was one which was performed very swiftly and quickly, but it became even more significant in history as it was the last execution of a woman using the guillotine, an execution method which had become ingrained in French history. The guillotine was seen by many inside of France as a symbol of the French Revolution and the very device that cut the head off the tyranny and the king and the queen, Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. However, it became used for centuries after. But what is not as well known is that for 4 years after World War II came to an end, the guillotine blade fell on the neck of a woman for the final time. Men continued to be executed on the device, and shockingly it was used only up until a few decades ago to execute criminals whose actions were immensely shocking and brutal. But what happened with the final woman who was guillotined, and why did she go to the execution device? Germaine was born in the May of 1917 inside of France, and no one could have predicted when she was a young woman that she would one day be written in the history books as a murderess and someone who deserved the guillotine for her crimes. Her job was a coal merchant, and she would sell coal to different companies who needed it for business. But she then met her husband, Albert Leloy, and they set up a family business together. However, the marriage was not necessarily a happy one, and Albert did not realise that one day the woman he saw walk down the aisle to marry him was a woman who would later murder him in a terrifying and savage assault. Germaine was having an affair with another man who she'd fallen in love or head over heels with, and this lover was many years younger than her, and he worked for their coal business as a clerk. She was sleeping with this man at work, but Germaine developed a scheming plot to plan to kill her husband, and she wanted to run the business on her own with her new toy boy. Because of this, she developed different schemes to kill Albert, and we don't really know why Germaine did not just try to seek a divorce and a less messy way out of her marriage, as she could have easily obtained this. She may have felt ashamed by this, or thought that murdering her husband and covering up was a cheaper way of getting what she wanted. Germaine told her lover to prepare the murder weapon, and 5 days before she attacked, he sharpened an axe for her, and he also cut the handle of the axe shorter, so that Germaine would be able to hold it easier and strike with more success. It was calculated, and it was horrific. The pair had planned to murder Albert down to a T. The murder weapon was even hidden inside of a pile of wood that had been dumped inside of their house, and it was then moved to a crate, ready for the moment that Germaine would strike. Further preparations for the murder were made, as on the 10th of December 1947 at 7 p.m, Germaine passed her savings to her lover, and this totaled to over 80,000 French francs, and she ordered him to hide it, as she claimed she would say she'd been robbed if questioned. After this, she went into her home and then picked up the axe and smashed her husband twice in the head with the weapon whilst he slept. It was a ruthless attack, and her husband did not see it coming, and he would never wake up. He was killed by the violent attack of his wife, and she planned to disguise the attack as a robbery gone wrong, or if someone had entered the home looking for the money of the family, and then killed Albert. But it wasn't long before she was arrested, and her lover was then seized too. The couple were then brought to trial for the attack and murder of Albert Leloy, and Germaine's lover, who she planned to run her business with, was given a prison sentence of 10 years for his role in preparing the murder weapon. Germaine was not given any prison time. She was sentenced to death and was sent to Angers prison to await her execution. Specifically, her execution method was stipulated to have been the guillotine. Despite its initial drawbacks, the French population saw the guillotine as a quick and efficient method of bringing the life of a criminal to an end. But when it was introduced, they did not like this, as they saw it as too quick to dish out justice, as they preferred seeing brutal methods such as the breaking wheel and being used to execute criminals, and they wanted to see people suffer. Now, the man who was ordered to execute Germaine was no other than the executioner of Paris, Jules Henri Desfenot, and he was told on the day of the execution to head to Angers prison to prepare. Inside of France, the executioner was a central one, known as the Man from Paris, and regional executioners had been gotten rid of, and these were a thing of the past, so there was only really one man to perform the guillotining. He was an experienced man, and his family had been executioners for generations. But he was no popular man, as people turned their backs on executions, and they did not necessarily like the people who performed them, despite for centuries flocking to see the morbid spectacles. Germaine was not executed in public. The last execution in this manner in front of crowds had occurred years before, as German serial killer Eugene Wildman had been executed on the guillotine, and many people even took images and photographs of the moment that the blade fell, which was said to have been poor form. Because of this, Germaine was executed behind the walls of the prison, inside the execution chamber, where many people had been condemned before. Now, she did request a clemency hearing, but this was rejected, and her death sentence was finalised. Then at 4:30 a.m. on the 21st of April 1949, Germaine was told that her time was up, and she was escorted from her prison cell into the execution chamber. The executioner was ready as a guillotine, and she would become the last female victim of the device. She was attended on by a priest, and she heard a final mass before she had written the final letter. Also, further preparations known as the toilette du condemn had taken place, and prison guards cut her hair short to ensure that the blade could fall on her neck, and if hair got caught, then there was a concern that her head would not be taken off in one swift blow. She was also given a last cigarette and a glass of rum to help her through, but she refused to take these. There was a slight issue, as her execution was delayed for a short time, as she could not actually be legally executed, and they had to formally parole her by the justice system and finish off some final paperwork. But this was then completed, and she was then led into the execution chamber. It was noted by witnesses that she turned pale and dressed in silence, helped by 2 inmates who shared her cell. But she was then taken up to the guillotine. The executioner and her assistant worked quickly, and they placed her on the wooden board and slid this on the device of death. She was moved under the guillotine blade. Final checks were made to ensure a successful cut, and the executioner released the blade, and it fell, taking her head clean off, and in a sense her execution was successful. Germaine Godefroy had been executed at 5:50 a.m, over an hour after she was told it was time for her death to be carried out. In history, she is remembered as the last woman to be executed by the guillotine inside of France, and she was allowed some privacy with her execution due to the behaviour of the crowds during public executions, but there were some people who were allowed to see her, including some of the family members of her husband, the very man that she had murdered. Thank you for watching, and support, please subscribe, and again, thank you for watching.